in a theoretical way, but also in actually transferring it into real lifestyle changes. And if maybe the thought of the illness itself is still too distant for us, I would like to reiterate that before diabetes eventually kills us, it may have taken away our eyesight, our ability to control our bladder. It might have formed sores in our bodies. It might have caused so many infections. And by the time we are dying, we will have spent a lot of money, for example, in dialysis, or in trying to heal the different infections that take advantage of the accumulation of abnormal amounts of sugar in our bloodstream. So having said that, let us take a look at what goes on in our glucose management system. So under normal circumstances, there are two key organs which are involved in our glucose management system. So the reason I keep on mentioning glucose is that glucose is one of our main fuels in our bodies, the food stuff that fuels our energy. Of course, fat is also there, but the ready energy comes from glucose. And glucose comes to us through the digestion of carbohydrates that we take in as food. So these two organs are the liver and the pancreas. The liver, I think, is familiar to all of us. It's fairly large and well known. The pancreas is smaller, but quite important. It is a gland that produces several hormones. We are going to be interested in two of them in today's session. So these two organs, the liver and the pancreas, will be cooperating with the brain and the two hormones that I mentioned, in order to ensure that the glucose that comes out of our digested food is absorbed and distributed through our bloodstream to all our cells for immediate use, or if there is extra, the extra is sent into fat storage for use in the future. And this is a good plan, of course. Whenever we have something useful, if we have extra, it is a good plan to store it. Just like if we have plenty of money when we are doing the business and we start making a good amount of money, we are able to pay our bills and so on. Any extra that we have, it's a good plan to save it. And that's what our body does exactly. It supplies us with the glucose that we need for our activities, and the extra is taken into the fat tissues to be stored for those periods when the food might be scarce. So under normal circumstances, this system works very well and effectively maintains the level of blood sugar within a very narrow range, around 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter of blood. And this is so at all times. And the reason why the levels are maintained in that narrow margin is because even slightly higher levels of glucose in the blood is highly toxic. For example, if our blood glucose rises a lot higher than this, we can end in what is called a diabetic coma, because the sugar will have been too much and it will have harmed our brain to the degree that we shut down into a coma. So although glucose is a very useful substance for providing us with energy, it is also toxic, but the toxicity depends on the amount. And this is the case with many things I think we are aware of, where they are okay in small amounts, but as soon as they go beyond a certain amount, they become problematic. So let us look at the liver and then the pancreas. So the liver is in charge of our energy supply between meals. That is when we are not eating. The liver is in charge of ensuring that we have energy. How does the liver do this? The liver stores about 24 hours worth of stored glucose. So stored glucose, if you might remember your high school biology, is called glycogen. So it's the same thing. It's just that the glucose that normally comes out of our digestive system, when it goes into storage in the liver, it's converted into something called glycogen, which is stored in there, and it's released in our bloodstream for use as an energy source when we are not taking any food. So for example, Pascal and I have already had supper. but we will not be eating again until tomorrow morning. But that does not mean that we are going to die out of lack of energy, because, of course, the liver has got some energy stored in there, and this can be released if we need it in order to supply us with the energy that we need. Because remember, even when we are sleeping, our bodies are working. We have our breathing still requires energy. Our heartbeat, all these things still continue using energy even when we are not awake. So we are always using energy whether we are awake or asleep. And so the liver contains ready energy that can be easily made accessible to us. But as I've said, it is not a large amount. It's about 24 hours worth. Then once the glucose that is stored in the liver has been used up, another hormone is produced still by the pancreas. This hormone is called glucagon. So the two hormones we're going to be interested in this session is going to be insulin and glucagon. So then glucagon is produced by the pancreas also, and it stimulates fatty tissue to release stored fats so that it can be converted into fuel for us to use. So this means that maybe we have already gone through the 24 hours, and tomorrow morning when we wake up, of course, we have not had breakfast. Maybe like Pascal, you want to go out and do some exercise. Or if you're like me, you want to observe the day from the safety of the bedroom window. And both of these require energy, just different amounts of energy. And this is going to be when the stored energy is going to be released either from the liver or from our fatty tissue under the influence of this hormone called glucagon. So you can see that through the liver and its activities, we are able to be supplied with energy even when we are not actively eating, because our body has this mechanism that stores food for us to use in between meals. Then now let us turn our attention to the pancreas. So the pancreas is at work when we are eating. It produces, as I said before, glucagon, but in this particular case, when we are eating, the hormone that is important here is still produced by the pancreas, and it is called insulin, which I think is familiar for those of us who have had any dealings with someone who has got diabetes. So this hormone insulin facilitates the distribution of glucose, which has been absorbed from our food, through the bloodstream so that it can be distributed and used for energy by our cells for immediate use, or sent into storage for future use, either as glycogen in the liver that we just mentioned, or in the muscles. So we also store some amount of glycogen in the muscles, and that is why our muscles can go into action whenever we need them to. The extras, and this is the majority of the glucose that comes out of our digestion, is going to be converted into fat and stored in our fat cells. Now, you may have noticed that different people have got different amounts of fat that they store. Some people put on very little weight. Some people are able to put on a great deal of weight. And that is because our capacity to store fat varies very much. So anyway, to go back to this, the pancreas also makes and releases this other hormone that I mentioned, glucagon. And glucagon is normally produced in response to a drop in blood glucose. So when there's a drop in blood glucose, then glucagon is going to be produced so that it can stimulate our fat cells to release the stored fat. Insulin, on the other hand, has a different function. What it does is collect the glucose and send it either for use in the cells or for storage. So it is mainly a storage hormone, whereas glucagon is a release hormone that releases stored up fat. So it's as if one puts the glucose into storage and the other one opens the door of a storeroom and releases the stored fat. Now, if our diet habitually supplies more glucose than we need, then the chronic excess can lead to problems. Remember, high glucose levels in the blood is toxic to our tissues. So we have a double-edged sword here. It is extremely crucial for energy, but at the same time, high levels of glucose will be toxic to us. Therefore, I said before, that it is going to be tightly regulated within a normal range by using insulin to send any excess glucose out of the blood and into storage or into cells for use. So now that we've mentioned in brief how the system works, what causes the system to fail? Because remember, when I introduced this, I said that diabetes is a result of a failure in the system. So what could cause this system to fail? The actual thing that causes a system to fail is called insulin resistance. So insulin resistance occurs when the cells stop responding correctly to insulin. So the cells might be liver cells, or they might be muscle cells, or they might be the fatty cells. So any of these cells can actually refuse to respond to insulin because of a number of reasons. So when we speak about insulin resistance, that is what we mean. That although our pancreas is producing insulin, and in fact, it keeps on producing more and more, the cells are now not responding the way they should, which is usually that they should take in the glucose energy to use, or they should take in the glycogen to store in the liver, or they should take in the glucose, convert it into fat, and store it in the fatty tissue. So these tissues can stop responding in that way to insulin. And that is when we refer to insulin resistance. So what happens in this case is that the fat cells will have reached their maximum capacity. When they reach their maximum capacity, obviously it means that they can no longer store any more fat because they are full. So they start resisting the effects of insulin, because the insulin keeps on coming with the glucose and saying, open up and put this into storage. We don't need it just now. But the storeroom is full, so the fat cells say, no, we have no room left, so they don't respond. Something like the muscle cell will do the same. Maybe the muscles are not so active, so they don't need the extra energy. They already have all the glucose that they need. So when the insulin comes along and says, open up, I want to give you more glucose, they refuse to respond because they do not need that glucose. So when cells start behaving like that, refusing to respond to insulin, then is when we say there is insulin resistance. They are resisting the normal effects of insulin. So, but what causes this resistance of cells towards insulin? Because normally, of course, it's a good thing, as we said, for the body to get energy for use or to put it into storage. The thing that causes insulin resistance is two things. More, but the ones I'll mention here, the main ones, are a diet that's chronically high in refined sugar and refined carbohydrates. So these types of food, refined sugar, refined carbohydrates, and a lot of starchy foods, they overwork the pancreas, because remember we said the pancreas is when we have got food coming into digestion and getting and providing us with the glucose. The pancreas is going to produce insulin. The insulin is going to take up the glucose to its various destinations. But if we have a chronic oversupply of these foods which are rich in glucose, what is going to happen is that the pancreas is going to be overworked and the system is going to be overloaded. And as we know with any system, once it is overloaded and the overload is chronic, it is going to break down. If we have this once in a while, that maybe once in a while we take in this food, like for example, many of us older people, when we were young, we used to have these types of refined carbohydrates and sugar only maybe a few times a year, like during the Christmas holidays, we'd have a soda here, maybe one bottle would be a lot. Maybe Easter time, some people will be able to have maybe a birthday and so on. But I remember when we were young, actually, even things like birthday did not involve complicated parties and cakes and sodas and so on. But of course, as you know, things have changed now, and we tend to have the amount of refined sugar and refined carbohydrates in our diet has increased enormously. And this is what is driving this issue of insulin resistance. Because, as I've said, this high intake of these types of food are going to overwork the pancreas, because the pancreas has got to keep on manufacturing large amounts of insulin. And as the process of insulin resistance progresses, the body mistakenly thinks that it is not producing enough insulin. So it's going to produce even more in the hope that the cells are going to stop resisting and start responding correctly. So as the insulin levels increase, the cells become less and less responsive to it. So now it has got a negative feedback loop where the body is producing more insulin, but the cells are being even more resistant. So instead of getting the positive response from the cells, it gets an even more resistant response to it. So what is going to happen in such a case? It means that the glucose which is circulating in the blood looking for its destination is going to remain in the blood. And that is why when you now go for your blood sugar test, it's going to show that you have got a higher than normal amount of sugar in your bloodstream. This is because the cells have refused to take more in for their activities. The fat cells have refused to take more in for storage. And remember, as I said, the reason why we don't all get diabetes at the same rate is because we have different capacities for storing fat. Some people can store very, very little. So, for example, if you think about the Maasai people and the Samburu people in Kenya, they're a meat-eating culture where they culturally, they used to take very little carbohydrates in their diet at all. They live on meat and milk and blood. But as we have embraced the Western type of diet, they have started increasing not only the amount of carbohydrate, but also the amount of refined carbohydrate. So you can imagine that their system has a very limited ability to form fat. And as for those of us, our Maasai brothers and sisters and Guru brothers and sisters tend to be very lean. But as they start taking in this food, you see that the body morphology begins to change. And this is because they are now being forced to store all these amounts of glucose that these foods are bringing into their system. And of course, the system is going to crash. So what did I want to say next? So there's an accumulation of glucose in the blood, and this is going to show up when you take a blood sugar test. You might not even be aware that this is happening. You might have some symptoms like feeling tired, feeling maybe a bit drowsy, and so on. But some of the things that begin to show up is like frequency in urination. And if a urine test is taken, it will show that there's a very high amount of sugar in the urine. The urine is not supposed to have sugar at all. So the fact that there will be sugar in the urine is going to be a warning that the system is struggling, because now it's trying to get rid of the excess accumulated glucose through any means. And the easiest means for our system will, of course, be through the kidney in urine. So when that happens, when we start using the kidney to get rid of excess glucose, of course, the kidney this is not part of the kidney's work at all. The kidney has other detox responsibility, but removing excess glucose from blood is not one of them, which is why the kidney is among the organs that suffer the most as a result of this increased blood sugar. And that is why one of the major causes currently of chronic kidney disease is diabetes. So that is one cause. A diet that is chronically high in refined sugar and refined carbohydrates and too much carbohydrate. The second one is a sedentary lifestyle. Why is a sedentary lifestyle means that we move very little. This could be because our job involves long hours of sitting down, or it could be that we are able to do a lot without having to get up. So we become a little bit lazy in getting up and moving about. And the reason why this contributes to insulin resistance is that our bodies evolved to move for prolonged periods during the day, looking for food, looking for shelter, getting away from predators, and so on. So a sedentary lifestyle is not supposed to be part of our normal lifestyle at all. Detrimental for us. So that means that if we have a sedentary lifestyle, maybe our job is sedentary, or we simply dislike moving about a lot, or we don't have the opportunity for it, then our muscles are not going to be requiring the amount of energy that is available. Because I find that if we are working, let's say even seated, a sedentary job, we still get tired. We get mentally tired, but a lot of time physically we have not moved around at all, which means that all the energy that our body is supplying us with in order to provide us with the fuel for energy is not going to be used. So muscles which are not moving do not have a high demand for fuel. So that is one way. So those cells are going to refuse to take in any more of that glucose. They are going to become resistant to insulin. In addition to that, our evolution also involved periods of famine and periods of plenty. So in our cultures, maybe there was a lot to eat. Other times there was very little to eat because the crop had failed, the hunt had failed, and so on, which means we were also used to having periods of famine when food was very scarce. And during those times, it was an advantage to have stored food. However, for most of us these days, we do not undergo such severe famine conditions. And so for the majority of us, the food stored as fat just keeps on accumulating and does not get used. So those are the two I wanted to mention, things that are responsible for insulin resistance. So as the cells progressively become less and less responsive to insulin, then we are going to progress from insulin resistance into pre-diabetes. If this is not resolved, we progress further into full-blown type 2 diabetes. And as I said, some of the symptoms will develop slowly, but you might notice chronic candida infections, we might notice excessive thirst, we may notice frequent urination, and eventually when we see a doctor, we'll get that diagnosis. Now, some points I wanted to note is people of African origin, that is most of us who are on this call, are almost twice as likely to develop diabetes as people from European origins if we have refined carbohydrate content high in our diet. So if we are taking in the same amount of high carbohydrate content in our diet, we are twice as likely to develop diabetes as people of European origin, which means that we really have got an urgent need to attend to this and to minimize the amount of these foods in our diet. The second point I wanted to make is that most of the treatment that is currently available for diabetes does not prevent the progression of the disease itself. So even though you may see that your blood sugar is normal, the insulin resistance is still going on and it is still wreaking havoc. And that is why lifestyle changes are crucial for reversing diabetes. Rather than relying on your treatment, whether it is insulin injections or metformin or whatever it may be, lifestyle changes are crucial for reversing the illness. The reason why in Neolife we speak about reversing diabetes is because it is actually possible. Just as this illness progressed into existence, we can reverse it out of existence. and keep it at bay. And I think we have got customers that many of us can mention who have benefited from the products we recommend for reversing diabetes from Neolife. So the last point I wanted to make also is that some research has indicated a close link between certain types of dementia with faulty sugar regulation. So this is one of the insulin resistance is one of the things that drives premature loss of our mental capacities. So for those reasons and the ones I mentioned before, it is really very important that we get onto this. If we have the illness, we use the supplements and the lifestyle changes. If we have a familial history of it, we should be proactive and start taking the lifestyle measures. So I'll mention some of those lifestyle measures. We should reduce and replace refined carbohydrates in our diet by opting for very little or minimally produced carbohydrates. The reason why I'm saying very little is because if we're already pre-diabetic or we have got a familial tendency towards diabetes, then carbohydrates in all their forms are going to act as a trigger. So it is better, for example, if I compare the type of fruits we used to eat when we were young and the fruits we have now, the amount of sugar in fruits has greatly increased through hybridization. At the same time, the amount of fiber in the fruits has been reduced again through hybridization. Because of course, when we eat a mango, we like the soft, sweet mango with lots of juice, instead of the kind we had when we were smaller. Those of you who are around my age will remember, they were like using dental floss. They were full of fiber, and when you are eating the last of the mango, it would clean the gaps between your teeth because they were so fibrous. And that is the case with many of the fruit before they were hybridized. So if you already have a person who has got a cause to be concerned, and I would say all of us here on our continent of African origin, we all have a cause to be concerned. Beware of refined carbohydrates and sugar, and be cautious about the carbohydrate amounts and type that you take. Then the next lifestyle thing is to incorporate activity and gentle exercise in your lifestyle, because activity and exercise improves our insulin sensitivity. In other words, it helps to reduce our insulin resistance. Unless a person has got a very good reason, we should reduce the frequency with which we eat to either 2 or maximum 3 meals per day, so that we can give our digestive system a break, and so that we can have an opportunity to use the stored fat which we've been storing. So rather than taking, as it's been formally recommended, that we take 3 meals plus four snacks, I would say that gradually we should eliminate snacks from our diet, and we should focus on only eating during main meals. And for many of us, I think for many years, it was quite possible to eat just 2 meals per day. You eat a meal in the morning, and then you work during the day, and in the evening, you take another meal. And then, of course, the quality of the meals also is important. So by giving ourselves a break from digestion, it will give us an opportunity to use a stored fat, as well as for the system to clean up the byproducts. Then stress hormones are closely linked to tampering with our blood sugar management. So we should try to resolve stress as much as possible. And then, of course, now I want to go to the most important part, I think, well, also an important part, and that is the Neolife products that we recommend to help people to reverse diabetes. And the way in which the products we recommend works is by going to the root cause of the problem. Remember that a lot of medication that you'll be given will be dealing with the symptoms that have developed as a result of the progression of the illness. But what the Neolife products is going to do is help the body to turn back to where the problem originated and correct it at its root. So the first one, the superstar of our type 2 diabetes recommendation, is going to be botanical balance. a very good combination of herbal remedies that have been researched and been shown to promote the regulation of blood glucose itself. So we start with the immediate thing, which is the blood glucose, helping our body, our systems, so that it can deal with the glucose in our diet. Remember that the supplements usually are there to supplement the lifestyle measures that we are taking. So that is botanical balance, helps in the proper regulation of our blood glucose, because remember, that is what has broken down. The next one is N, very, very important, because N maintains the health of the cells themselves. Remember, the cell membrane is crucial. Every cell in our body, and there are lots of them, has got a membrane around it. And it is through the membrane that glucose and other things come in, or byproducts come out of the cell. When the cell membrane is in good condition, it works correctly. When it has been damaged either by the foods or lifestyle that we eat, then it does not work correctly. So N, very crucial. It is the foundation of our supplementation. And whether I mention it or not, remember N is always part of our supplementation. So in the case of type 2 diabetes, N will play a very important role in reversing insulin resistance. That is the root cause of the whole thing. So N will be working at the very foundation of the problem. Then next we have fiber tablets. Fiber tablets is a boost of fiber in our diet, which will slow down the rate at which glucose is absorbed from our digestive tract. So this is why fruits, which have got are a very sugary food, have got fiber, so that it can slow down the rate at which the sugar enters our blood. So we add the fiber tablets to give us a boost of fiber, and this helps us to regulate the blood glucose by slowing down the rate at which glucose is absorbed out of our digestive system. Also very important. Remember, you get the fiber tablets, but you can also increase the amount of fiber from your food by increasing the amount of leafy vegetables that you take. Normally, I will say opt for cooked vegetables, because some people's tolerance of raw vegetable might not be so good, but definitely increase the amount of vegetables in your diet, because they not only help us with our sugar metabolism, they also help to keep our gut healthy. Then the next product we have in our mix here will be omega-3 salmon oil, which improves the functioning of the pancreatic cells. Remember, I mentioned the pancreas, that small organ, which is a gland that produces the two hormones we mentioned, insulin and glucagon. So they also, because of the demands made on them, they may be starting to malfunction, and omega-3 is going to help them to function better, so that they can produce the right amounts of the hormones that are required for managing our blood glucose correctly. Then finally, I would also add multimineral alfalfa to support the liver and the kidney function, because remember, when the liver is struggling with our sugar issues, it is not doing the other very important work of the liver, which is detoxing. So if you imagine all the other toxins that are still getting into our bodies, and the liver is busy because we are taking too much refined carbohydrates and sugars and junk food, then it means we are preventing the liver from effectively detoxing, because it is busy dealing with our poor dietary choices. So multimineral alfalfa will be useful there, and will help to mend here and there. For people who already have diabetes and maybe are noticing they are having nerve pain, which tends to accompany diabetes, we can also add magnesium. So magnesium complex also is an addition that you can have there. Multimineral alfalfa does have some magnesium, but if someone is struggling with nerve pain as a result of diabetes, then we might also add magnesium complex. So I've really eaten into Pascal's time, but this is one of the topics that I feel very strongly about, because it is actually possible for us to not only slow down the progression of the type 2 diabetes. We can actually reverse it. And even more importantly, we can slow down the rate at which it is running through our society and our communities. And especially for those of us who are parents of young children, it is highly important that we take this into account, because type 2 diabetes is now occurring in very young children, which means that they are going to be doomed to a life of health issues. So I think that at this point, let me thank you very much for having spent the time with me. And I hope that the session has been useful, especially in your own personal life and your family, but also for you to be helpful to those among whom you move and have influence, so that we can turn this around. Remember, here in our continent, we don't have the kind of resources that are required to ensure that people will get liver transplants, kidney transplants, dialysis, and all the long-term care that a life of diabetes is going to bring about. So with that, thank you very much. And I hope that